Thank you. The Revenue Committee meeting will come to order. Will the secretary, I'd like to introduce you to our secretary, Judy. She'll be with us throughout hopefully the next 2 years, taking care of the Revenue Committee. Judy, will you take the roll, please?
Here.
Senator Ide.
Here.
Senator McCowan.
Here.
Senator Pappas.
Here.
Chairman Beitman.
Here. Okay. Well, welcome everybody to the Revenue Committee. Pretty sure I don't see too many unfamiliar faces, so you all know the rules and decorum and all that good stuff. So we'll just move right into the first bill today. We're going to take up Senate File 63, Tax Administration Revisions. Is there anybody that wants to walk us through the bill? I know this is a Revenue Committee bill from last time. Come on up and introduce yourself and we'll get started. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Brenda Henson, Director of the Department of Revenue. It's my pleasure to present the first bill of 2023. Senate File 63 was a result of the Department of Revenue sitting down with our legal counsel and just trying to identify some administrative statutory clarification that we believe would be beneficial. So what this bill does is really try and take excise tax, sales and use tax language and put that in mineral, and take the mineral language and put it in sales and use on these specific issues. So what I'd like to do, if it's the pleasure of the committee, I'd like to just start looking at page 2 of Senate File 63, and you'll find under enforcement. So 3914-108 would be the coal statutes. And the reason why you'll see this added language duplicated multiple times is 108 is coal, 208 oil and gas, 308 trona, 408 bentonite, 508 uranium, 608 would be sand and gravel, and then 708 is other valuable deposits. So just for clarity there. What we did is we went to the excise tax division statutes, which the reference is 3915-108 B Romanet 3. That language then we're using in the mineral statutes just to simply clarify that the department may credit or waive any interest imposed by this subsection as part of a settlement or for any other good cause. We have that in sales and use tax. We're just asking for it for severance tax, which brings a point of clarity. Our intent was only on severance tax. This committee may remember that in January 2022, we started collecting a estimated ad valorem mineral tax on behalf of the counties and the county entities. We do follow along with the statutes related to penalty and interest on those. However, the way that is administered, we send out the invoice. If they don't pay the penalty and interest, we notify the county treasurers that it hasn't been paid. And then when they go to reconcile that account, it would be the county treasurer's responsibility to make that determination. So our intent for this legislation is only to have it applicable to severance tax. And if there needs to be an amendment to do so, we're happy with that. If there are no questions related to the mineral tax, I'd like to turn your attention to page 4. The 3915-108. Again, this is sales and use tax statute. We have gone to the mineral tax statutes, 3914-108B, 5 capital E in minerals, and brought this language in, and it's just simply to clarify the timeline that the Department of Revenue has to process any assessment, penalty, and interest that was a result of an audit finding. So we just wanted to make sure that that was clear within statute, and then you'll find the exact same language in chapter 16, and that's the use tax. So we've got the same language in sales tax and then in use tax. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would stand for any questions.
Any questions?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. So is the penalty still going to be the same? Like $10 flat fee, 10%, and then an interest charge per day?
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Henson?
Senator McNown. Yes, this bill does not change any of the established language in statute for the penalty and interests. This is only related to the department's ability to waive that penalty and interest for severance tax.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator McEwen. Any other questions so far? No questions? Thank you,
Thank
Ms.
you, Mr.
Henson.
Chairman.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody else that wishes to testify on this bill? Come on up. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jim Willix, Chairman of the Commerce County Commissioners, and here on behalf of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. We've read this bill and agree with Director Henson's intent, but absolutely we believe needs the amendment to clarify that it is for severance tax only. The statute is not clean to read, not surprisingly with some of our taxation statutes. And so it is be our recommendation that the bill before you in the repetitive language that's in 108 through 708, recommend that you add the department may credit or waive any interest on severance tax imposed by this subsection. Just make it very clear that that's what it applies to. It's not clear to me, but a couple of people that I trust say that it is implied that it could apply to ad valorem, and that's not what we want to do in this one. So we would encourage you to adopt that amendment. Other than that, the bill, I think, cleans up some things, as the director said, and I would stand for any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Willix. Is there any more questions? Yes, Senator Ide.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jim Willix, good to see you here
Good to
today.
see you, sir.
I just wanted to make sure I followed you right here. So you're saying, like, if we go to 108 and after the word interest, you want to put severance taxes. Is that what you're saying right
Correct.
there?
Any interest, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, Senator Ide, any interest imposed via something that says via severance tax or imposed by severance tax penalty. I'm not quite the wordsmith here, but yes, I think, and then you would repeat it in every one of those sections.
Okay.
And
Thank
then
you.
708 or the 3915s, no comments on those. Those seem to make sense to me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Willix?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any more public comment, testimony? Yes.
We do have someone online that would
Okay.
like to. come
We'll
into-
let him in.
All right.
Admitting Emily Paravicini.
We're admitting Emily Paravicini.
Okay. As soon as we see her pop up on the screen here, we'll turn her loose.
Emily, you need to turn on your audio and video.
All right, can you see me?
Yes, thank you. Welcome to the Revenue Committee.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'm Emily Parvicini. I am the Sublette County Treasurer. I am also the current acting chairman for the Wyoming County Treasurers Association. Had a brief discussion with the other treasurers here just a little while ago about this bill. And at this point, we don't feel that it's something we are opposed to necessarily. We do agree with Jim Willix that it would be important to have that distinction of severance tax in the language so that it does not apply to ad valorem taxes. The other caveat that we would like to see, and this is not something probably that will need to go on the bill, but that is used with prejudice, that it's limited use. It's not something that's going to be used willy-nilly. You know, the interest that we collect on NOVCs for, as the bill is written now, it almost appears as though if there was an assessment done on an audit and say it was from 5 years ago, and it was found that that taxpayer owed the county $5,000 or $6,000 with 5 years of interest. That's a lot of money that is collected at 18%, and then is distributed to the school. So I think our most important caveat is that it does distinguish that it's only for severance and that it's used limited.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Are there any questions for Ms. Paravicini? I think I
Yes,
pronounced
thank
her-
you, Chairman.
You're welcome. Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
very much. Are there any other on Zoom that wish to testify? Anybody else in the room that wishes to testify? Going once, going twice. Okay, public comment is closed. Committee, what is your pleasure? Moved by Senator Pappas. Seconded by Senator French. Any discussion on the bill? Any discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Ide.
so the process, since I'm a freshman here, on the conversation regarding just, putting severance in there and not applying all the other ones, how do we go about that during our discussion today? Thank you.
So Senator Ide, what you would do is if you felt obliged to offer the amendment on severance tax, you could go ahead and make that motion. It would be on page, I think, starting on page 2, line 11, you would say, I'd like to make a motion to amend and add the words on severance tax after the word interest. So I think that would be the motion. If you would like to make your first motion, I'd entertain that.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I think what you just said there, I would entertain that motion, or I guess I would move that we make that amendment to that and carry that out through the entire document is essentially where that language is put in there.
Okay. So the motion is, so for those of you who are following along, on page 11, or page 2, line 11, after the word interest, insert on severance tax. And then it would be again on page 2, line 19, after the word interest, insert on severance tax. Page 3, line 4, after the word interest, add on severance tax. Again, on line 12, page 3, after the word interest, add on severance tax. Page 3, line 20, after the word interest, add on severance tax. Again, on page 4, line 5, after the word interest, add on severance tax. And finally, on page 4, line 13, after the word interest, insert on severance tax. I believe that covers all of them. Seconded by Senator McEwen. Any discussion on the amendment? Any discussion? May I entertain the question then? Call the question. All those in favor of adopting this amendment, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed? The amendment carries. We're back on the bill. Any other amendments, committee? Question being called. Judy, will you take the roll, please?
Senator French,
Aye.
Senator Ide,
Aye.
Senator McCowen,
Aye.
Senator Pappas,
Aye.
Chairman Biteman.
Aye.
There, Chairman, Mr. Chairman, there were 5 ayes.
Thank you, Judy. Senate File 63 has passed. We are on to our next bill for our consideration, which is Senate File 42, taxation of cigars. Do we have anybody here that wants to present this good little bill from last year, or from the interim? Anybody? Ah, Secretary Gray. Okay. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Brett Fanning. I'm the Excise Tax Administrator here at the Wyoming Department of Revenue.
Thank you, Mr. Fanning. Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So for Senate File 42, this is the taxation of cigars. And with this bill, there's a couple different components to it. So the first one is it imposes a minimum tax on cigars, and this is capped at 30 cents a cigar. Then what it also does is it changes the reporting period for these premium cigars from the acquisition, the purchase time, to when it is sold. And then it provides a definition for premium cigars. And so, Mr. Chairman, if you'd like, I'll proceed down this bill and kind of walk through the points of it.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in 3918-101, these are our definition statutes and our tobacco tax statutes. So right now, we do not have a definition of a cigar. And so what this bill does is it puts in a definition of a premium cigar. And so a premium cigar means that it's wrapped in whole tobacco leaf, it's handmade or hand rolled, and it has no filter, no tobacco tip, or no tobacco mouthpiece. Now, in general, when you're talking about cigars are generally tobacco wrapped in tobacco. And so that is commonly what a cigar is. This definition does go a little further than that. And so just one important clarification to note. And so getting down to the taxation rate, this will cap the tax on a premium cigar at 30 cents a cigar. Now, why that's important is because right now, in our tobacco tax statutes, again, definitions are a little lacking in our statutes, but right now, cigars, any type of cigar, is taxed at 20% of the wholesale cost. And so this one would cap that. And you can do some math to figure out what that wholesale cost would be. And that is something that maybe I'll talk about as I get done going through this bill. And Mr. Chairman, any questions thus far?
Any questions so far, committee? I have a question on the definition piece on page 1 and 2 there. Why just a definition for premium cigar and not just a regular cigar?
Mr. Chairman, this is a point of conversation, and I've had this with several folks around the state and around the country. So here in Wyoming, it is important to note that in our statutes, we don't have a definition for cigarette, cigars, or other tobacco products. Now, that being said, we do here at the department in our rules, we have those definitions. And so that is what we are currently administering these tobacco taxes based on. So it is a very good discussion topic because we are lacking definitions in statute. This one does add a clarification to that. So outside of, when I was testifying earlier in the summer, I talked about all these buckets that we have with tobacco taxes. So you've got cigarettes, you've got vapor products, you've got moist snuff, and then you've kind of got everything else. And so right now, cigars are kind of in that everything else category. So what this bill does is it takes out premium cigars. So then out of everything else, you've kind of got premium cigars. And that's kind of where we're left at. Hopefully that answered your question, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, it does. Senator McEwen has a question.
I'm going to go back to the chairman's question. Why aren't we including all cigars? Why just premium cigars? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, very, very great question. I do not have the answer to that because when this bill was drafted, it was just drafted with premium cigars. Now, for the department, would additional definitions help? Yes, absolutely. I do think that would help the department. I think it would help other constituents. I think it would help taxpayers. I think it would reduce confusion. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you, Mr. Fanning. Any more questions? Proceed, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So back on 3918-104, the tax rate, it caps it at 30 cents a cigar. So then if we move down on the taxation rate, so in our statutes, starting on page 3, that first paragraph, lines 1 through 8, if you are a consumer and you're not purchasing this from a retail establishment, you still owe the tax on these cigars. What this paragraph does is it also caps the tax on a premium cigar. And so getting down to 3918-107, the compliance portion of this is a topic I've had a lot of conversation about. So starting on page 3, lines 14, and then going down to page 4, lines 14. This section completely changes the model for premium cigars. And what I mean by that is right now, when taxpayers report their tobacco tax to us, they report it all on when it's purchased. And so they fill out a return saying, hey, I purchased all of these tobacco products for this price. And then I send in the tax to the department on a quarterly basis, and then I'm done with it. So the intent of this paragraph is to make the tax due on the sale of these products. And this came out of some discussions from earlier this summer about with premium cigars, this kind of category of cigars, sometimes that inventory can sit for a little longer than maybe what you'd see at a convenience store. So the intent of this section is to ease that burden. And so the department as written, this is something we can administer with this bill. We can make this happen. I'll talk about costs at another time, but we can certainly do this. The combination of the tax cap and this shift in the reporting period, I've talked to several folks around the state, and it seems like this can be done. It really is geared towards a small segment of our tobacco users. And so the combination of this tax cap and the shift in the reporting period, my sources, my research, my reaching out to constituents per committee request says this can be done if those two things don't change. Any questions before I continue, Mr.
Any
Chairman?
questions? We'll go with Senator Ide first. Senator Ide.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before we get too far along, I just want to back up just a little bit. You know, you've got this 30 cent, maximum on a premium cigar. Where did that number come from? And I'm just curious. I mean, if you could find a $1 cigar, you'd be paying more than 10% on a $1 cigar if you just went in there and bought a cheap one. Just curious about that. Thank you.
Mr. Fanning.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, yes. So the language from this bill came from the state of North Carolina. And so that's where this 30 cents per cigar came out of. Now, based on the requests from this committee, I reached out to the state of North Carolina. In a previous taxation role I had with the state of Wyoming, I had contacts all throughout the country. I reached out to him. And so that's where the language came from, was from the state of North Carolina. Now, your point is something that's very important, right? When I did my fiscal note for this bill, it did say that it is a big tax decrease. In general, and again, that's not my policy decision whatsoever. That's just the way the math works out. Administratively, what this means is that if you do buy a cigar, a premium cigar per the current language, if the wholesale cost of that is over $1.50, then you're going to be paying the 30 cents no matter what. When I was doing my research, when I was reviewing and reaching out to the state of North Carolina and constituents here locally in Wyoming, they said generally the average wholesale cost of a premium cigar is $10. And so, yes, there is a decrease there. There is. I don't know how, I'm not dancing. That's just the fact of what the bill does. So the 30 cents did come from the state of North Carolina. And yes, when I was reaching out to everyone across the state, the retailers that this would impact said the combination of the cap and the premium cigar definition means that all of their cigars would fall under this category. Now, if you were to change the definition, if this was the committee's pleasure, then caps really could matter, because if you go to a local convenience store, a definition of a cigar could be completely different, and maybe it's not a premium category or large. You'll hear large spoken as well. So if you change the definition of premium cigar or update it, or it may impact what that cap does, and the constituents who would impact that may have to report differently. Taxes would be different for one type of cigar versus another. Hopefully that helped.
Yeah, Senator McEwen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just curious, if we're gonna set a tax rate at 10%, why did we exclude cigarettes and moist snuff? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Fanning.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, outstanding question. The reason is because those are in a different section of our statutes. And so for cigarette taxes on this one, they're taxed differently than kind of this other category. If you go back and I was talking about these buckets. So you've got 4 buckets currently. So you've got cigarettes that are taxed one way, a stamp. So if you buy a pack of cigarettes at a convenience store or anywhere else, at the bottom of it, there's actually going to be a stamp saying that, hey, I paid Wyoming tobacco tax, this is good. That's one category. The other category for moist snuff, this one gets a little complicated, but I am going to try and simplify it. It's based on weight. So it's based on 60 cents an ounce. And so if you go and you buy a can of Copenhagen, in that price that you have purchased, there's actually tobacco tax in there, and it's based on the weight. And so here, again, electronic cigarettes, that's another bucket, and it's taxed at a different rate. So coming back to this bill, the last bucket we have is kind of everything else: pipe tobacco, cigars, dry snuff, twist tobacco, all of those. That's where this piece is geared towards, and that's why those rates are different.
Follow up?
Button gets harder and harder. It seems to me that we could hugely simplify that with this bill. Just make it 10% of the value instead of 60 cents an ounce. The weight of the paper on a cigarette and a stamp. I'm just wondering, would you support if we just went 10% on the sales price on all tobacco products? Seems to be the most fair. We're not developing any haves or have-nots. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Fanning.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, a lot of that question is geared towards policy. And so I'm going to shift my answer, but I'm not dodging the question. A large portion of taxpayers would understand it better and maybe be more compliant if tax rates were consistent. And that I'm not dodging that question. It's just more of a policy question. But I field calls all the time about how these things are difficult, and they are. And for a retailer that's selling a bunch of products, yeah, you've really got to know what's going on. And then in addition to kind of lack of definitions, but we have them in our rules, that adds to the complexities as well.
Any more questions? Senator French.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe Senator McEwen asked this, but would you explain again why the regular cigar, the other kinds of cigars are at one rate and these premium ones are at the 30 cents? Would you go over that again? Did you decide to reach out to, did you say North Carolina, for how they do it? I mean, was that your own initiative or somebody asked you to do that, or the former revenue committee? Can you kind of guide me through that again, please?
Mr. Fanning.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, absolutely. This was based on the former revenue committee from over the past sessions. And so that 30 cents a cigar, that is it's really a trend that's kind of developing across the nation. And I want to get to the point of why this trend is developing. Okay. So there are some federal legislation, there's some federal legislation here that really comes into play. So with cigarettes, moist snuff, and electronic cigarettes and vapor material, there's federal legislation out there that says, hey, if you're going to ship this across state lines, you've got to actually tell that taxing jurisdiction that you're sending product into their state. And that's important. Remember, I said cigarettes, moist snuff, and electronic vapor material. Now, if we get back to this other bucket, okay, that other bucket is not included in those. You'll hear it PACT Act reporting. And so if retailers are sending these products across state lines, there's not necessarily a reporting requirement federally. And so this is where there's this kind of developing trend across the country of fairness, saying there's not the same type of discussion here, there's not the same reporting requirements. And so maybe cigars and other tobacco products as well are falling through the cracks. And so it does kind of play into a fairness issue, and that is a trend I've seen from North Carolina. There's other states I could throw out as well, but I don't want to throw them out just because. So that's where this trend is developing. Those figures are trending across the country.
Follow up, Mr.
Yeah, thank you,
Senator
Mr. Chairman. So do you think that's where this trend, this across the country, on the premium cigars or whatever, you think that's a fair thing? I mean, did you reach out and see what other states were doing, or? Thank you.
Mr. Fanning.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, yeah, the answer is complicated. And so you have a variety of folks on both sides of this aisle. And I don't want to really outline those arguments because those are really policy considerations that I don't really want to get into. You have two sides of this. You're talking about an expensive cigar, and then you're talking about a fairness issue. And just not to really dive deep into those arguments, I'm going to stay away from that question. Again, I'm not dodging, but there are states that are putting these tobacco products into different buckets. There just are. And it's not necessarily because they're safer or not, and I don't want to get into that discussion, but states are separating these products into different buckets for a variety of reasons.
Senator McEwen, you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I look through the bill, I kind of see a disconnect, and maybe you can explain that to me. I think earlier you said the average premium cigar sells for $10. And the tax rate can't exceed 30 cents. As I do the math, that would be a 3% tax. 2 sentences earlier, it says we're going to tax at 10%. So we have this sliding scale tax on one tobacco product that doesn't include the others. When we discuss the fairness issue, I'm not quite understanding the logic behind how that was written. Could you help me with that? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Fanning?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, everything you said is correct. Yes, it is. When I was doing my fiscal note, there is a break-even point where a certain tobacco product will be taxed differently, even though it may be very similar in nature. There is a sliding scale, that is certainly true. And yes, most premium cigars will meet this threshold where they will only be applied the 30 cents cap. And it is important to note too that when I was discussing with retailers here locally specific to this industry, that the cap is important for this bill, because the more you start rising the cap with the change in the reporting period, you could start having maybe some potential inventory mismatch where you've purchased product, it's sit for a while, and retailers have to be very diligent on allocating those costs and make sure when they sell it. And so it is something to note that the 30-cent cap, it is a trend across the country. There are several states that have 30-cent cap, and it is the sliding scale. But updating the cap without maybe shifting the reporting period is something that could potentially be a burden in certain areas.
Senator Pappas?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would imagine in the other categories, for instance, moist snuff, I mean, if it's by weight, so it doesn't matter. There's no quality thing you're looking at, whether it's good quality snuff or bad quality snuff. It's just by weight. And I'm assuming probably, I don't know for a fact, but vapor products are the same way. There's probably premium vapor products and less premium, but there's no differentiation in the tax there. Cigarettes as well, right? You can buy probably, I don't know, I'm not a cigarette smoker, but expensive packs of cigarettes or not. We're just taxing by the pack. So I don't have an issue with whether it's frankly, I have an issue that is premium cigars. I think just we got to get rid of the premium and just all cigars. Because I do smoke cigars occasionally, and I can tell you as was mentioned, this caps out at $1.50 a cigar. I don't think I've ever purchased a cigar for $1.50. So yeah, I believe that we ought to go ahead. I think the testimony I heard in committee during the interim is that this 30 cents is happening all over, and certainly we don't necessarily have to go with what everybody's doing, but it is trending. But I do believe it ought to be on every product and not identify premium cigars. If we're going to start putting those kind of definitions, then I think we need to start defining everything in statute, including cigarettes and all of that stuff. If it's defined in rule, then I think we leave definitions in rule, personally. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Wouldn't you agree, Mr. Fanning? And I would also make that point, as this new revenue committee has come together, I think you're going to see a push. I think we would all agree that our tax code is in need of some simplification and some fairness. And we tax a lot of things at different rates, and it doesn't really make a lot of sense what our predecessors have done to us. But that might be a theme you'll see throughout our 2 years on this committee, is we're going to take a look at why things are the way they are. Maybe we can simplify our code and make it more equitable across the board. So if you have anything else, please continue, Mr. Fanning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll just continue with the bill. And moving forward to page 5, again, just adding that premium cigar definition to the language in the first paragraph, lines 1 through 6. And again, the timeline, line 8, and then 10 through 15 is just basically our normal reporting for quarterly returns, just adding that premium language in there. Mr. Chairman, I would like you to know that this bill is effective July 1, 2023. I do have a fiscal note with this bill, and whenever you would like me to address that situation, I'd be more than happy to. If you'd like me to step down so you can hear public comment as well, I'm at your pleasure, whichever you would like, but I am done reviewing this bill unless there's further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Fanning. I do have a question on the reporting from consumers. I guess I'll be ignorant. I didn't know consumers had to report. I thought it was just wholesalers. Do you get a lot of people self-reporting, hey, I bought a cigar and here's my tax, or is it pretty rare?
Mr. Chairman, you know my answer because I could see it in your question. It does happen. Folks do self-report. They really do. Would I like to see more of them? Yes, absolutely. The rate is reduced for the consumer, basically because as a licensed retailer, wholesaler, the way it is in our statutes, you do get some breaks for compliance, and there are some discounts when you purchase tobacco products and you're going to sell them to someone else. So the consumer rate is basically half in the statutes. When we do get PACT Act reporting, right? And so folks are, right now, vapor material, we're seeing so much vapor material right now that come through the PACT Acts. We actually do send those folks bills, and it is at the rate that is in statute. So if taxpayers don't self-report, the department does take it upon itself and send those consumers bills.
Any other questions? Yes, Senator McEwen.
I'm just curious, what is the current tax rate for cigarettes and moist snuff? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Fanning.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, so right now I did bring that return with me. So if you buy a pack of cigarettes, it is 60 cents a pack. That's what it is. It's basically 3 cents a cigarette. So, and then there's usually 20 cigarettes in a pack. So it's 60 cents. Moist snuff, as we were in discussion before, is 60 cents per ounce. And the reason it's separated by ounce is, say, for example, you were to buy a can of Copenhagen Long Cut. So the tax rate on that one would be 60 cents plus what is over the ounce. So say it's 1.3 ounces, you would get that mathematical, there you go. Thank you, Senator. So there, Mr. Chairman, can I ask the Senator a question?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, how many ounces is on that can?
Senator Ide.
Hold on a second, let me get all the paper lined up here so I can read it.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, I do know it's very small language. Generally, if it's long cut, Mr. Chairman, and there's no pouches, it's going to be a little more than 60 cents because it's over an ounce. But if it is Copenhagen long cut pouches, those are generally under an ounce, and you'd be capped at that 60 cents.
Okay. Senator McEwen.
I own a grocery store, and I sell these products in the grocery store. And I can tell you, as we bring it in, what we pay for the pouches, versus the snuff versus the long cut is pretty much the same. So should one choose to chew tobacco, I should have a sign up. This one has less taxes. This one's gonna really nail you to the wall because it's under an ounce and it's 60 cents. This whole, I'm trying to grasp why, and I almost think it's so the inspectors that come in have something to do. And would you agree that if we had a flat tax rate on all tobacco products, that would be the most fair way to go with this? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Fanning.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, again, I'm going to dodge your question. However, I am going to say that I receive feedback daily, if not hourly, that if it was simpler for the consumer, for the retailers, for yourself, for everyone to understand, that it would be simpler for everyone. Now, the rates, obviously a policy decision, but I do hear, why are you charging me this rate as opposed to this rate? And again, that's not my decision.
Thank you, Mr. Fanning. Any more questions? Yeah, Senator Ide.
I'm sorry, I can't, the crease is right on the weight on there. I looked, I can't give you that, but it is Copenhagen long cut, and you got that right. Thank you.
So, Mr. Fanning, since we have you up here, do you mind going through the fiscal note, or would you like a break?
Mr. Chairman, I'm good to go if you
All
are.
right, let's keep her rolling.
Okay, so the fiscal note, so everyone, everyone has seen the note that has come up for, there would be a decrease in revenue just from the state side because we are capping a category that we aren't currently capping. What I do think it's important to note while you have me up here is that the bill does, as currently reads, it is effective July 1, 2023. I did reach out to my IT contractor, and it is important to note that there is some programming costs associated with this particular bill. And mainly that's because it would require a new return. And so as you can see, Mr. Chairman, this return where everyone reports electronic vapor material, moist snuff, and kind of everything else is pretty cluttered. Plus, everything on this is reported when it's purchased. So yes, if you purchase tobacco products, you do have to float that tax until you can recoup the cost when it's sold. So this bill, with shifting the reporting period, means that we would need a new return. And there is programming costs associated with it per my IT contractor. It means flowing a new return through our system, and programming costs can be pretty expensive.
Okay. Senator Pappas has a question.
That's a one-time cost, correct?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, yes, sir, it is. Once that programming cost is done, the maintenance, the ongoing service is provided in our current contract.
Senator French.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You started out, when you started talking about this fiscal note, saying, if I wrote it down right, or capping a category we're not currently capping. But what do you mean by that? I mean, if you'd get more detailed for me, please.
Mr. Fanning.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, yes, absolutely. Thanks for allowing me to clarify. So right now, again, talking about buckets, other tobacco products, their current tax rate's 20%. So right now, premium cigars, any sort of tobacco is at 20%. If you were, under the current language, to purchase a premium cigar, and that is over $1.50 in wholesale price, that means it would be capped at that 30 cents a cigar, which is a lower rate than what it would be normally. If it was a $10 cigar, right now it would be $2 in tax, as opposed to 30 cents. Hopefully that helped, Mr. Chairman.
Sounds good to me. Any other questions before we let him go? stick around. We might have more questions, Mr. Fanning.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for a great explanation of the bill. Anybody else want to testify? I see Secretary Gray is joining us. Welcome, sir.
Yes, thank you.
Please introduce yourself. We all
Yes.
know you, but the
Chuck Gray, Secretary of State. Great explanation from Mr. Fanning. Appreciate his thoroughness, always been professional. And wanted to talk a little bit about the background of this bill. This came out of the last Revenue Committee meeting. And I got a call from Donovan Short, who I think is going to be testifying in a little bit, who retails out of Casper premium cigars. And there's just been problems in this area around the country, the way these taxes aggregate. And this is really about providing relief to our small business owners. So I'm very supportive of the bill. Just wanted to talk a little bit about the background. I certainly understand what you're talking about with simplification. I think with the way the bill title is drafted, and I'd certainly support expanding the definition. I mean, in response to that, that was just a policy question before the last committee, and I think the last committee wanted to keep it narrow. I mean, we was happy that the bill advanced, but the makeup of the committee is very, very different. And now, so certainly for an expanded definition, but I would just ask you to keep the cap in there, and then also that collection time period. And certainly on the simplification discussion, I think that's great, but just the way the bill title is worded, still time for other bills or, you know, in the interim or whatever. I think that's great discussion, but thank you.
I have a question for you, Secretary Gray. Would you have heartburn if the premium cigar definition were to go away, or is that something that's pretty important to the bill?
Well,
Your
it's
thoughts
modeled
either
after
way.
that. Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's modeled after that North Carolina bill. And to get into the timeline a little bit, we in our Lander meeting requested that to be drafted. That was in April. And then we came back in, I believe, May, and it got rolled over to the final meeting, which was in, I believe, September, October. So it's from the North Carolina bill. That amendment passed. I think it's fine to expand the definition to other cigar products. I think that's fine, and or just apply it to all cigars, period.
Any questions for the good secretary? Any questions? Thank you so much for coming down. Congrats on the new gig. All right. Any other people wish to testify? Come on up. Thank you. Welcome to the Revenue Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Laura Lewis, and I am here representing the Cigar Association of America. And we appreciated very much the opportunity to speak to this bill in interim. And as Secretary of State Gray mentioned, this bill came about out of the interest of some cigar retailers here in Wyoming. And although the Cigar Association of America supports cigar tax caps, we cannot support the bill in its current form, as has been discussed, really because of the definition of premium cigar. I'll keep it brief, but as many of you have already discussed, we have concerns when you segregate a segment of our product line and industry and treat it differently in applying the tax rate. So otherwise, we're neutral on the rest of the bill. With that, I stand for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Lewis. Any questions for Ms. Lewis at this point? Seeing none, thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any further testimony? Do we have anybody on Zoom that wishes to testify today on Senate File
Mr. Chairman, we
42?
do have one person, they just took their hand down.
Oh,
Oh, now we have somebody with their hand up. I'll
all
admit.
right, let them in. The water's warm.
We're getting a bunch of hands up.
All right.
We're going to admit Kristen Page Neal, excuse me. Now also. We're also, we're also admitting Donovan Short.
Okay. Whenever you're ready, who's ever up?
I think it's got me. Can you hear me?
There you are. Mr. Short, floor is yours. Please introduce yourself.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate it. My name is Donovan Short. I was referenced earlier by our new Secretary of State. I'm with Casper Cigar Company, and we very much appreciate the former's Revenue Committee's careful consideration back during the summer when we were talking about this. A lot of these discussions were quite fruitful during that meeting, and I think we are in favor of the bill, obviously, pretty much as written. I would, to the definition that keeps hanging up with all the questions here, from a retailer's perspective, I think one thing that would be important to mention is just the function of price, period, on these items tends to accomplish, I think, what people were trying to accomplish with defining them in the first place. Lower price point items would be under the cap, higher price point items would be over the cap. And as Senator Pappas mentioned earlier, when you get into our segment, which is the premium cigar segment, those costs tend to be significant. You're talking about dollars versus pennies on tax. Two people can walk in and get two things called a cigar at two different establishments, perhaps one a convenience store and perhaps one a premium retailer like us. And one consumer is paying pennies, one consumer is paying dollars, and ultimately they both smoked a cigar. So it's kind of the same thing. Again, we very much appreciate all of the thoughtful consideration that's got us to this point. I will tell you again, the fairness issue is not just for retailers. I think it's for consumers as well. We are Main Street brick and mortar businesses. There are, on the premium side, probably less than you can count on one hand in Wyoming, but we bear a pretty large and different burden of this tax structure. And it has been mentioned, we go out to these trade shows and conventions. There's release schedules for more limited premium cigars, things that we can't really control the calendar on. And the way that it sits now, we immediately have to front that tax on things that may take 6 months, 9 months, a year or more to sell. They may not sell at all and have to be discounted below our purchase price. So it's one of those things that really hits the premium segment a lot differently than it hits everybody else. So we appreciate very much all the consideration, and a big thank you to Mr. Fanning as well, who has been quite proactive from the Department of Revenue, reaching out and brainstorming solutions. And as you see, he's been a great assist in getting through this process. So thank you. Here for questions if you'd like.
Thank you, Mr. Short. Do we have any questions? Yes, Senator Pappas has a question for you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you again, Donovan. Thank you for testifying. One question I had, where I think it's the important part of this bill is, when the tax is collected. Could you tell us one issue that I could see that hasn't been talked about is if you get stock in and you've paid the tax, and subsequently something happens, it spoils or goes bad, then you've not been able to sell that product and recoup the. So can you speak to that?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, that's accurate. We have cigars sometimes that are damaged. We have various things that could happen to inventory, and it doesn't matter. We just calculate the purchase price based on the wholesale cost of that item, and we're on the hook for that. As we're quite honest with our reporting, but we don't exempt those items from the tax that we file with the DOR. So you're correct.
Yeah, thank you. Any more questions? Yeah, Senator Ide has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Donovan, thanks for testifying today. Senator Pappas mentioned. Do you have any strong opinions on some of the conversation up here today on whether just to, make it, just take premium out and cigars are across the board, and Senator McEwen brought it up as well, like with a grocery store. Are you in favor of just, I don't know if you sell anything other than cigars, but just a flat tax all the way across on tobacco products? Thank you.
Mr.
I don't know
Short.
if flat tax, pardon me, Senator, thank you for the question. I don't know that flat tax is the perfect solution, but I do share the same concerns that it certainly is a little bit muddy in how the various statutes have kind of came together. And I think it's having some unintended consequences to various segments, even people that are not in my particular line. I will tell you that, again, the fairness issue with it, comes down on the consumer side a bit too. I think that consumers are quite confused why, a very small price, cigar carries such a different tax burden than a larger price. And I think when you get into too many, hair splits in this, that could wander off a bit. It's worth noting that, the original kind of genesis of the bill, the conversations that we had with Representative Gray to attempt to get before the Revenue Committee during the topic selection process, we really never sought this definition process that got attached to this bill. I think that was something that members of the old committee had some interest in, and I understand the thrust behind it. But as I mentioned before, just a function of wholesale cost accomplishes what you're trying to do anyway, by segregating the various price points. So I think that definition piece, again, I'm certainly not attached to it or in favor of it.
Thank you, Mr. Short. Are there any more questions before we let you go? I just want to thank you for being part of the process, the legislative process, and thank you for your time today, sir.
Thank you for the consideration, Chairman.
Thank you. All right, who else do we have on Zoom?
We have Kristen Page Nye. She just needs to unmute.
Great, thank you. And I apologize for the technical difficulties earlier. Good afternoon. My name is Kristen Page Nye, and I am the Government Relations Director for the American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network, covering Wyoming and Montana. And thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, for allowing me an opportunity to present our concerns about this bill. We are very much opposed to this bill, which seeks to reduce, it's basically seeking to reduce the tax on premium cigars. We would be opposed if it also reduced the tax on all cigars as well. And there's two main reasons. The first is the health reason, and I'll go into that briefly, and the second is the economic reason. For the health reason, I think we have to remind ourselves that cigars are not harmless. People who smoke them are 4 times more likely to die from lung cancer, laryngeal, oral, and esophageal cancers than non-smokers. All other tobacco products, like cigars, should be taxed at the same rate as cigarettes to encourage smokers to quit rather than switching to a lower taxed or priced alternative. And that's what we're very concerned about with a bill like this, is that when you lower it on one type of product, that you are going to encourage people to switch to those lower tax products. And knowing that 90% of long-term smokers start before the age of 18, we see this as a youth onset disease, the addiction to nicotine. And kids are the most price sensitive. Their suppliers, their family, and their friends are less likely to give them those products if they're taxed at a higher price. So tax parity is really important to us. And if you would like to know a little bit more about how we look at the definitions and how we try to encourage tax parity in all of the states that we work in, I'd be more than happy to share that with you. And then the economics of tobacco products. Why would we want to reduce the tax on a product that costs the state of Wyoming and the taxpayers dearly? Just a reminder, $30 million in annual healthcare costs directly are caused by smoking. $48.1 million in Medicaid costs caused by smoking. $908 per household is the residents' state and federal tax burden from smoking caused government expenditures. So I just want to really reinforce that these products aren't, they're costing taxpayers money. And so I would strongly encourage you to continue taxing them and in fact, look at increasing the tax on them. With regard to what we heard in the interim committee with cross sales borders and internet sales, I think that's more of a enforcement challenge, or we think that's more of an enforcement challenge, and would just strongly encourage those retailers who are saying that, you know, so many sales are lost to out of state, to provide that information to the Department of Revenue so that they can collect those taxes. And thank you for your time. Again, I would be more than happy to talk to you about how we would recommend defining other tobacco products of all different types and making them in parity with the tax on cigarettes. I'm open for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Page Nye. Are there any questions? Well, let's go to my right first. Senator French, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ma'am, thanks for your testimony. And I get where you're coming from, but isn't smoking, whether it's a cigarette or a cigar, an individual choice, just as maybe somebody wanting to frequent often fast food restaurants or eat fatty foods or something that puts on extra weight that maybe they shouldn't or wouldn't normally gain, or them buying that fast car and running down the interstate at 130 miles an hour? You know, aren't these individual choices? Do you want to comment or not? No, I do, truly, I do get where you're coming from. Thank you.
Ms. Page Nye.
Mr. Chairman and Senator, thanks for that question. And we are not anti-smoker by any means. The reality of it is, though, is most smokers start between the ages of 12 and 18. And that's when their brains are developing and they're utilizing nicotine for their coping skills as instead of more of healthier choices. So that's where we are, you know, we're in the business of trying to eliminate cancer and reduce the pain and suffering for those who do have cancer. And we know youth are price sensitive, and this is the best way for us to prevent for future generations from becoming addicted to these products.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? Quick one from Senator McEwen.
During your testimony, you quoted 48.1 million spent on Medicaid dollars for healthcare related to this.
To smoking.
To smoking.
Mm-hmm.
What's your source for that?
Let's see. I can provide that to you, but that is the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, and I will get the specific citation and provide that to you.
Thank you, Ms. Page Nye.
You bet.
Are there any more questions? We really appreciate your testimony. Thank you so much for being here today.
My pleasure.
Thanks. Judy, who else we have on Zoom?
Mr. Chairman, we have Glenn Loop online, and I think he's unmuted and ready to go.
Mr. Loop?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Glenn Loop. I'm Director of State Advocacy for the Premium Cigar Association in Washington, D.C. And Donovan, that testified earlier, is one of our members in Wyoming, and we're here to support the content of SF 42. We'll get into the nuances of some of the definitional questions, which we're fine with going along with the sentiments of the committee and Ms. Lewis and the like on that question. Just to provide a little bit of additional background, we now have tax caps of this nature in 14 states. There will be pending legislation near you this coming legislative season, we believe, in Nebraska, Idaho, and Montana nearby, in addition to states like New York, New Jersey, and Virginia. So that's a pretty solid collection of states that in the not too distant past have enacted cigar tax caps. This is primarily to help drive business to your local Wyoming small businesses, to allow them to compete against less expensive alternatives or less expensive states and other venues where they can get the product cheaper. It does help make your Wyoming small businesses more competitive. There's been, because this is a relatively new phenomenon, there's not a bountiful display of economic data. But what we do have is a lot of anecdotal data that's been enough, for example, that the state of Michigan dropped their sunset clause on their cigar tax cap and made it a standing part of their state tax policy. Also, in the state of Minnesota, retailers have clearly detected an uptick in sales tax collections. So whereas OTP collections may go down as a result of the tax change, sales tax collections seem to be needling upwards. With that, I'd like to go to address the statements that were just previously made. Not all tobacco products are created equal. And we have submitted, and the industry has submitted, and independent research analysts have submitted data to the Food and Drug Administration that clearly denote that premium cigars and large cigars are not to be equated with the same health impact as other tobacco products. We do not have the relationship with the questions of inhalation, mortality, and addiction that's associated with other tobacco products. And that's clearly been indicated through scientific research that we would be glad to submit to the committee and to the entire legislature. Also, when we get into the question of demographics, it was stated, that the gateway age groups of 12 to 18 when tobacco products are introduced to young folks. Our demographic is clearly ages 35 to 65. 35 to 65 is the noted national demographic of most every premium cigar shop, every large premium cigar shop in the country. And that's been clearly denoted through various surveys and research done by the industry and by the federal government. So I hope that clears up that piece of the equation, that we are, the average American cigar smoker that considers himself a cigar smoker has 2 per week. We could have 2 in 1 week and go 3 weeks without one, which clearly denotes the lack of addiction qualities associated with large cigars. So we don't view this as a public health threat or something that complicates your public health issues in any way, shape, or form. I hope that helps provide the background on the health question, and that the other states that have enacted a tax cap have clearly benefited their local cigar shops like that in Casper. Basically, the cigar shops in Minnesota, Michigan clearly have publicly stated that this type of a policy has saved their local businesses because there are just too many other cheaper alternatives for folks to go to find their product. So this is really a shop local bill, if you will. So with that, I'll clam up and glad to take any questions from the committee.
Thank you so much, Mr. Loop. Are there any questions? Senator McEwen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So when we talk more competitive or better priced, are we not setting a tax rate that every shop that's going to sell the same products is going to pay the same tax? So when you say more competitive, are you referring to online sales instead of Skippy's down the street versus Fred's up the street? They don't exist. I get away with that.
Online sales are clearly one way are clearly less expensive because they can buy in volume. So it does make your local cigar shops more competitive in that arena. And while I've got the floor, if you will, I do want to revisit the question of definition. There's a federal TTP definition of large cigars, which is much broader if you're looking for one, but we're perfectly welcoming to the broadening of that definition, losing that definition and just referring to the word cigar in the statute, if that makes the committee more comfortable. Yes, Senator, I think the online piece of the puzzle is clearly a way to keep your local shops more competitive.
Any more questions? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Loop, for being here today. We appreciate your testimony.
Our pleasure. Let's get out there personally.
All right, come on out. Okay, Judy, any more on Zoom?
Yes, we have Liz Albers on Zoom. if she
You know,
wants.
I picked this bill because I thought it'd be easy for my first committee. I had no idea there was this much interest in cigars, but the more the merrier. Let's go. Just a note that we will be back in at 2:00. So we do still need to work this bill. So let's keep on schedule and keep our comments brief and our questions pointed. So.
Okay, Ms. Albers needs to turn on her video and her audio.
Good afternoon, Chairman Beitman and committee members. Is my audio coming in all right?
Loud and clear. Sounds good.
Great. My name is Liz Albers, and I'm the State Government Relations Director for the American Heart Association for both Montana and Wyoming. The American Heart Association's mission is to be a relentless force for a world of longer, healthier lives, and accordingly, we have to stand in opposition to Senate File 42. Unfortunately, although combustible cigarette smoking has declined, total consumption of cigars in the United States has increased dramatically. Between 2000 and 2020, cigar consumption increased by 115%, while combustible cigarette consumption has declined by 48%. Unfortunately, many people believe that cigars are not harmful, as the previous speakers stated. However, studies have shown that cigar smokers do inhale, thereby absorbing smoke into their lungs and bloodstream and depositing smoke particles in their lungs as well as their stomachs and digestive tract. Furthermore, all cigar smokers, whether or not they inhale, expose their lips, tongue, and throat to smoke and its toxic cancer-causing agents. Cigar smoke is composed of the same toxic and carcinogenic components found in cigarette smoke. And each year, approximately 9,000 Americans die prematurely from regular cigar use. A single large cigar, the ones contemplated by this bill, can contain as much tobacco as an entire pack of cigarettes. Another reason that there's been an increase in cigar use is that cigars are undertaxed. The failure to tax cigars adequately is a public health problem, as it keeps cigar prices low, thereby increasing the likelihood that kids try cigars and become addicted, as well as reducing the number of adult smokers who quit. Similar to what my colleague at American Cancer said, or the previous speaker from American Cancer said, they roll over from one tobacco product to another. When individuals are faced with cigarette tax and price increases, they'll might otherwise quit or cut back. They may, instead of quitting or cutting back, they may turn to these lower priced alternatives. Additionally, to make matters worse, we've seen cigarettes slip through loopholes in state tax law definitions to qualify cigars. So they qualify as cigars and face lower tax rates. There's no justification for giving cigars any special tax treatment, as they are just as deadly. Senate File 42 elevates one tobacco product above others, And for these reasons, the American Heart Association opposes Senate File 42 and urges you to vote no on it. And I thank the committee for its time.
Thank you so much, Ms. Albers. Are there any questions? Any questions for Ms. Albers? Seeing none, thank you very much for being with us today, and thank you for what you do. Are there any more comments, testimony? That is it. Anybody else in the room itching to get up here? Okay, with that, public comment is closed. Committee, what is your pleasure?
Mr. Chairman, I move the bill.
Bill's moved by Senator Pappas. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Senator McEwen. Any discussion on the bill? Any amendments?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Yeah, I'd like to move the amendment that was provided to us just recently. And so since not everybody out there has it, I'll go through it line by line. So page 1, line 12 through page 2, line 7, deleting the definition of premium cigar. So delete those lines. Page 2, line 20, delete premium. Page 3, line 8, delete premium. Page 3, line 20, delete premium. Page 4, line 12, delete premium. Page 4, line 13, delete premium. Page 4, line 21, delete premium. Page 5, line 4, delete premium. Page 5, line 11, delete premium. And page 5, line 13, delete premium.
Any discussion on the amendment? Senator Wright.
Just thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the amendment, I'm not quite sure the process we're going through here. We'll probably vote on the amendment and then the bill. There's a lot of things I don't like about the bill. I guess we can vote on the amendment and then go to the bill and discuss it there. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Yes. So seeing no further discussion on the amendment, I'll call the question. All those in favor of adopting the Senator Pappas's amendment, say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Amendment has passed. We're back on the bill. And Senator Ide, now would be the time to discuss your frustration, heartburn, displeasure with this Senate file.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, the previous Revenue Committee did go through a lot of work here. This is better than maybe with this amendment in particular, what we're trying to do here. But I'm still listening to all the conversation here today. Everything's so complicated anymore that nobody can figure out the wholesalers, the retailers, the customers, what all these taxes mean. And I don't know the process we go through here today to try to amend this to fix that, but that's where I stand on this bill.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Pappas.
Mr. Chairman, certainly this bill is very specific and it doesn't get into the entire convoluted tax laws around tobacco. And we can't go there. As was mentioned, as Secretary Gray said, that's for another time, another place, another bill. But this certainly clears up one big thing in my mind, and that's moving the sales or the collection of the taxes at the point of sale. I think that's big and important for all of our dealers. And I also think it's a fairness issue. Since we don't tax quality on any other product, tobacco products, why are we taxing, an expensive cigar versus a least expensive cigar? We should just tax by the unit as we are doing with the other tobacco products. So this puts us in line with all those other by the unit and not by the price. Granted, we may want to change all of our tobacco laws. It is convoluted. We heard that, but we can't do it in this bill. But this bill does have value.
Thank you, Senator. Any other comments? I would just echo that. I agree. Committee, we have our work cut out for us for the next couple of years. And I think we can do it. I really do. I think we're going to dig in. We're going to simplify and correct a lot of these tax issues and make it more fair. So I'm ready to strap in and get that done. I think this bill is a small step in that direction. I like the cap idea, and I'll echo Senator Pappas's comments. And so I will vote to move it through. But with that, I will call for the question and the roll call.
Senator French.
Aye.
Senator Ide.
Aye.
Senator McCowan.
Aye.
Senator Pappas.
Aye.
Chairman Biteman.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, there were 5 ayes on this bill.
Thank you. Senate File 42 has passed the Senate Revenue Committee, and that clears the desk. So, Judy, do you have anything else for me, or are we good to adjourn?
No, I think that's it.
All right.